Welcome to the Prodigy session, Functional Diversity to Foster Conviviality, Understanding the Cascade of Amazonian Tipping Points. So we are very glad to welcome you, although we can't see you, but we hope that we can get in close interaction with you via chat. So that you have an idea what we are up to, we want to introduce to you our hypothesis on the Amazonian tipping points from an interdisciplinary scientific perspective. And therefore, we get into close dialogue with our stakeholders, as close as it is possible in this virtual form. So first, we will give you an introduction to the importance of the Amazon. Then we will have a short interactive reflection on your human-nature relationships. We will introduce you with some basic concepts, what we are using, and so what we are talking about to make us better understandable. We will get into the strategies and challenges we are facing and how we are going to overcome them together, always in dialogue with our stakeholders. And then we pass to the main part of our session. And this is an account of several stakeholders from the MAP region who tell them about the potentials, the challenges, and possible solutions from their direct environment where they live, work, and think and act and interact. After this, we are heading for a final discussion with some of our colleague scientists who are already present in this session and listen to you, and obviously with you via chat. So please note down any questions you faced during those presentations of the videos so that we can afterwards pick them up in our discussion and hopefully find some common answers. So please, first video.
A Amazônia tem um papel importante na regulação do clima, onde as chuvas são bem distribuídas ao longo do ano. A quantidade e a distribuição das chuvas na região amazônica são essenciais, tanto para os ecossistemas como para a rica biodiversidade existente. Um fenômeno fantástico que ocorre nessa região é conhecido como rios voadores. Trata-se de um volumoso rio que voa no sentido leste-oeste da região norte do Brasil. Quando chega nos Andes peruano, faz a curva e é direcionado para a região centro-sul do país e parte da América do Sul. Nesse processo, os vapores d'água do Oceano Atlântico são trazidos para dentro do Brasil através das correntes dos ventos alísios, encontram os vapores de água que são reciclados pela floresta amazônica através da excepcional capacidade que as árvores têm de absorver grande quantidade de água do solo e direcionar para a atmosfera pelo processo de evapotranspiração. Esses vapores de água, aliados aos aerossóis que são produzidos pelas copas das árvores, ao se unirem, se condensam, se transformando em chuva e garantindo uma boa distribuição dessas chuvas, tanto na região amazônica, quanto no centro-sul do país e até boa parte da América do Sul. Essas chuvas distribuídas de forma regular ao longo do ano garantem boa irrigação do solo, colheitas fartas das plantações e favorecem também uma importante parte da economia brasileira que é advinda da agricultura. Estudos científicos apontam que a floresta amazônica possui 5,5 milhões de quilômetros quadrados, que representa 40% de toda a floresta tropical global. Os ecossistemas amazônicos possuem de 10 a 15% de toda a biodiversidade terrestre e armazenam de 150 a 200 bilhões de toneladas de carbono. Todos esses elementos
All these elements make the Amazon rainforest an immeasurable asset for the planet, requiring its preservation.
Okay, so I think you heard a lot about the flying river concept. For me, this is the main aspect of the Amazon, why it's important to us, nature. Really recycles the water in the ocean, and therefore brings the water into the environment.
¿No me deja cambiar español?
For all of us, and I think if agriculture doesn't start stopping to cut down the forest, they will bite the hand off that it feeds. Agriculture in South America is highly depending on this flying river concept, because otherwise they would have to water their soybeans. Therefore, beware. If you want to continue with the agriculture, you have to save the Amazon too. So that's a regional aspect of the Amazon, which is not aware of. A lot of people tell me in Brazil, at least, some of them I heard, oh, it's because of global climate, but you should be first. Yes, you're right. We should be a little bit more concerned about global change because we did more to it. But unfortunately, the Amazon is also a tipping element of the climate system. That's the reason for the global interest, but for you, on the regional scale, it's also your interest to have the water. And at the local level, because we humans understand the local level a lot better, it's also important. So at the region we work on, in the map region, it's also important to have this system of evaporation of the trees, which have a huge surface that feeds the rain again, is needed to have locally smallholder agriculture there. And that's our interest. We are looking at in our interdisciplinary research group, and I think that's something you will learn a lot about. The others will talk about it again. But coming back to the concept of the flying river, you can see it's like a cascade. You know, it brings the rain in from the ocean, the trees transpire the water again, gets back more to the west, it respires again. So it's like a cascade coming until the Andes. And if somewhere in between it's cut off, you will lose this cascade of feedback loops in the water system. Maybe this system is a little bit more simple to understand and a good beginning of our concept that we use and will apply in our Prodigy project on the tipping cascade. So we have tipping points. Many of you may not be familiar with tipping points yet, which is just like if you have a balance, you look at it, at a certain point the balance will tip towards a new state. And that's how ecosystems react, or should react, because they should resist some stress, because you always have external stress to a system. So if you have a natural system, you have external stress, for for example, from the climate. So some drought is a natural part, and therefore the ecosystem have to resist to it, and they can sustain this and come back to the normal state. But if the stress is getting too much, it will tip towards a new state. And this is something we should avoid of having, just like we should avoid having a breakdown in the cascade. And in the map region, we will look at it at the soil, because the soil is at the center of the ecosystems, and they provide us with a lot of services which we are not aware of, and it's difficult for us humans to be aware of it because it's in the dark below our feet. Not very interesting, I have to admit. But they provide us with a lot of biodiversity, and biodiversity does exactly what I just tried to explain. You resist external stress. And if you have a lot of functional diversity, so species that have the same function, and you kill some of them by external stress or reduce them, you still have some left to come back to the original state. And if you only have one left, and you have external stress, and you lose that one functional gene, you lose the whole system. And therefore, if you stress the soil too much, for example by droughts, they cannot resist anymore, and they cannot provide the trees that need the water, and they evaporate the water, and they feed the cascade of the flying rivers. You will lose that system. So even if you think you only need the soil to hold your plants, it's not true. You need the soil to provide you with water, and the organisms, that's what I forgot, in the soil do this.
So thank you very much, Hermann, for these explanations. And thank you, Jair, if you're listening to us from Rio Branco, perhaps, or where you are, for this excellent film and this introduction to the flying river concept. So I think there were quite a lot of terms and ideas and concepts which are perhaps new to you. So just a little bit of patience. Afterwards, everything will be explained. Now we start into our interactive session. So I'm sure when you saw it, the film, or listened to the explanations, you thought of your own relationship with nature, to ecosystem services, which you use in your environment, or perhaps you have observed or experienced environmental stress and can talk about it and tell us something about it. So we would be very interested to get you into the boat of this discussion and this session today. If you could write in the chat some of your ideas of human-nature relationships. So we give you a little time, and then Claudia, my colleague, and Rebecca, my two colleagues who take up the notes from your chats, will pass your impressions to the audience. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. I hope you had some ideas and put them in the chat. I know it is not so easy to be interactive in this form, but let's try it. I pass on the word to Claudia and Rebecca. Hopefully something came in. Who wants to start?
Yeah. So, hello everybody, my name is Claudia and I am moderating the chat in the InWing, the Portuguese and the Spanish version. And we had some responses about the human-nature relationships we are maybe experiencing now in the Amazon. We had one comment from a person in Colombia, and wait, let me see her name. Sorry. So, yeah, from Julio Cesar, and he was telling us that the cattle in the part of the Amazon in Colombia is augmenting, and this is leading to a change in the land use in the region. And the other maybe challenge they are facing in the Amazon, in the Colombian Amazon, is the illicit crops. So this is something linked to the narco-ganadería, or like the drug trafficking, and the cattle ranching. And then we comment from Diego Alexander Guarin. He was saying that depending on how your relationship is, or also your knowledge about the natural resources, then you can create some strategies that are maybe like the best ones for managing the natural resources. And then Jair Rodrigo from Sao Paulo, Brazil, is telling us that he is working as a student and volunteer in a socio-environmental project with agroecology, and that he feels a really strong love for nature, and that is why he engages in these kinds of projects. And then I will see if we have some other comments in the Spanish. We don't. And maybe I will give now the word to my colleague, Rebecca.
Yeah, thank you very much. Welcome also from my side again. My name is Rebecca, and apparently some people needed more time to think, so we don't have any impressions on the English chat, but we have some questions already, so you can look forward to the discussion later on, where we will go more into the details of those questions. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. So I'm happy we got some impressions, and perhaps this thought about your own human-nature relationships is accompanying you during the session, and you relate it back to what you have learned, studied, and thought about human-nature relationships, because this is what it is all about. So now, after you've heard already some concepts and terms which perhaps are a little bit strange and unknown, we will come to the next part. It's the introduction of our tipping cascade and some basic concepts we are drawing from. So I'm sure after this video, some things are already clearer and it is easier to discuss about. So please, the next video.
Yeah, so the first tipping element that Prodigy addresses is the soil functional biodiversity. Soils are the most species-rich habitats on Earth, and imagine that only 1 gram of soil hosts about 10,000 different species and 1 billion individuals of microorganisms. And such microorganisms provide essential ecosystem services. For example, fungal networks, which are often plant-specific, span huge distances in soil and live in symbiosis with plants. The plant feeds fungi that in turn provide nutrients to the plant. For example, phosphorus mining by microbes and fungal networks is a very important and crucial functionality. You know, phosphorus is off-limiting, so such microbial biodiversity associated with phosphorus mining is essential for functioning of a plant-soil ecosystem. Soil microbes are also involved in nutrient recycling, thus providing nutrients from dead biomass to living organisms, including plants. So a balanced soil microbial below-ground biodiversity is a prerequisite for healthy and productive plant above-ground biodiversity.
On the next level, we look at the economic livelihoods. tipping points could also occur there, and they could potentially be related to tipping points that occur on the previous level of the cascade, that is, soil functions. But economic livelihoods do not necessarily jump to another level if a tipping point on the level of soil biodiversity is crossed. Livelihoods might change, or they might stay the same. But when are tipping points of livelihoods crossed? We think that as long as other alternatives for income generation and gaining well-being exist, livelihoods could stay constant. It is important to note that livelihood and well-being depends on various factors, incomes on one side, but also all kinds of ecosystem services on the other. Our approach in Prodigy is to assess how those benefit components are affected by crossing tipping points on the soil and biodiversity level, and to what extent losses there can be replaced or not to keep livelihoods constant.
Social cohesion is the third step in our research cascade. When we talk about social cohesion, it's basically all about relationships. We have to first understand that every person and every group and everything that we do research on stands in relation to other people, to other groups, and to other things in their environment. So in Prodigy, we approach social cohesion as a so-called crucial system function of the social system in the MAP region. That means that social cohesion describes these interactions and relationships between the members of society, and that these are crucial to the system. Or in other words, we describe the relationships between the agents of change within the social system. These relations we focus on are interactions between different societal groups, as well as between societal groups and the state. And these are often characterized by a set of attitudes and norms, and of course also how these attitudes and norms manifest themselves in the behaviors of the people themselves. And now, if I may briefly refer back to the title of this session, where we read, "To foster conviviality," we can ask ourselves, what does that mean then in the context of social cohesion? And well, in the end, it's sort of an extension of these relationships that I have just described, because it's an extension towards the environment, or also in other terms, everything that is non-human. So it's tackling basically the question of how can we live together humans and non-humans, together, how can we live together on this planet? Which new ways of creative interaction are we able to imagine? Or in the end, how can we all with our differences and our diverse beings, how can we all live in respect and in care for each other?
Okay, coming now to step 4 in our research cascade. Before we address the respective tipping point, here somewhat specifically termed moist convection, we briefly need to recapitulate the fact that both come on the economic system and the social system affect the climate system, given that human demands on environmental goods and services determine land use dynamics and land use change. In the Amazon, these increasing human demands provoke an ongoing forest conversion, which impacts the climate system twice. The first, most prominent impact is, of course, an increase of the anthropogenic greenhouse effect, given that tropical forest systems store enormous amounts of carbon, which are released into the atmosphere through deforestation. The second, distinctly less recognized impact addressed here is the alteration of energy and water fluxes between atmosphere, biosphere, and soils. In general, tropical rainforests transpire great amounts of water, which condenses in the atmosphere, forms cumulative cloud as the most obvious manifestation of moist convection, and convective rain. As compared to intact rainforests, the evapotranspiration rates over farming and grazing areas are reduced. Accordingly, forest conversion alters the regional climate settings and the diurnal cycle of moist convection, both within and between impacted ecosystems. The correlation between deforestation and moist convection, however, is strongly nonlinear and a question of scale. Especially large-scale deforestation leads to reduced evapotranspiration and moist convection, and accordingly entails the risk of system shifts towards an aridification of formerly moist tropical environments.
Hello. So I was asked to give a definition of the term scale. So a fundamental part of science is making observations and, of course, also to describe and to understand what is going on in the real world, to describe and understand processes that are going on. And that's exactly where the term or the concept of scale comes into play. And depending on the scientific discipline, scale can have a very different meaning. So, for example, when we look at geography, the concept of scale is strongly linked to space. So this means here we can, for example, differentiate between the local scale, which might be a plot or a field. Then, to differentiate from that, we find a so-called landscape scale, which might be a small region or a village or something like that. And we can scale up until the global level, and that's called the global scale. In contrast, when we look at different types of science, or let's say to the social science, the concept of scale means something completely different. Or means here, the equivalent to the local level might be the individual decision maker, a single person, for example. And then more aggregated scales could be attached, for example, to communities or to whole societies. And then depending on the aim of your scientific question, you design your experiments and observations at the appropriate scale level in order to gain knowledge on how processes and systems are operating on these different levels of scale.
So how do we handle all this? Prodigy is an inter- and transdisciplinary project. So what do we mean with inter- and transdisciplinarity? Interdisciplinarity describes a close cooperation between different academic disciplines. And transdisciplinarity includes the dialogue and even the co-production of knowledge with local knowledge holders and practitioners. Both together, we try to incorporate to the dialogue we are looking at in a minute. Okay, so we are back, and now we are going to get deeper into the definition, not into the definition part, but in the part of the strategies, the challenges, our research hypothesis. We are going to explain this because now we already have explained the basis of the basic concepts and the terms. And now we go a little bit deeper in the research design. And afterwards, you will find this in the practice dialogue with our stakeholders again. So please, the next video.
As an inter- and transdisciplinary research project, Prodigy wants participants to understand the interdependence between natural and social systems, and to jointly identify options to govern related tipping dynamics. As such, a short interactive reflection on human-nature relationships will take place at the beginning of the session. Our hypothesis is that knowledge-based management of functional diversity enhances the resilience of complex social ecological systems. Resilience we understand as the ability of a system for example, an ecosystem, food production system, income and livelihood system, or governance system, to withstand, recover from, and adapt to external disturbances. We test this idea through contextualizing it within cascades of tipping elements, from the microbial functional diversity in soils to the impact of ecosystem services on the economy, social cohesion, and regional climate processes. As such, we argue that diversity management should be in the interest of local communities as well as global actors, as it offers the chance to merge economic interests with the needs of local populations, nature conservation, sustainable resource use, and the development of vibrant societies. We aim to reframe the common role people give biodiversity as victim of human impacts by highlighting its indisputable relevance in achieving sustainability. As those making decisions around national and global environmental governance, along with the financial community, become increasingly aware of the need to internalize the costs of socially and environmentally harmful activities, sustainable thinking is on the rise, also in international financial transactions. Accordingly, sustainability is becoming integral to management and strategic thinking, not only in civil society, but also in governmental bodies, companies, and corporations. Fostering and supporting these positive developments requires solid data and the monitoring of social ecological resilience on the ground. Together with its local partners, the research consortium Prodigy is taking on this challenge in southwestern Amazonia by pushing the concept of tipping points from a metaphoric description to a system and process-oriented understanding. Through our transdisciplinary and participatory approach, this understanding will provide the foundations for target-oriented options for the management of social ecological systems. So our key questions are: starting from the interdisciplinary perspective that tipping points are found within the natural system, but also within social, cultural, and economic systems, we ask, what is the connection between soil, land use, and social cohesion in the Amazon? How can a research project help to strengthen communication structures in a border region, like the one between Peru, Brazil, and Bolivia in the southwestern Amazon? And how can local and academic knowledge production complement each other?
The Amazon region is on the periphery of all countries it belongs to. Our study area is composed of subnational entities, which are Madre de Dios in Peru, Acre in Brazil, and Pando in Bolivia, where land use and development outcomes are partially dependent on political decisions taken by subnational governments. This partial independence also means that there is some leeway for the areas in question to make their own land use policy and to design and implement development plans. Civil society in the area, although engaged, has limited ability to identify and effectively use windows of opportunity to effect change when it comes to environmental management. For example, regarding the rules for management plans of natural reserves. And if opportunities arise, a regional or even global alliance would be of great help in pursuing local visions of sustainable development. Such alliances infrequently exist due to the lack of information or communication structures. Co-producing the necessary knowledge to effectively address dangerous tipping points is a major challenge for scientists working in the Amazon. Such knowledge has to be produced in inter- and transdisciplinary ways, and thoughtful communication strategies are key.
As we will show in our session, when it comes to local diversity management, particularly in ecological, social, and economic transitions, and sometimes crisis, Listening to local stakeholders is the best strategy to co-produce useful knowledge. For this reason, and due to the Amazon's political dynamics, we advocate for a bottom-up strategy with local partners and local civil society leading the conversation. At the same time, we amplify these local voices by distributing co-produced knowledge across our global networks, like in this GLF conference. And now some policy recommendations. Diversity of soils, ecosystems, cultures, social systems, and economic strategies is the best foundation for managing current and future challenges, as well as the best foundation for life-sustaining pathways. Building resilience to the mounting risks of socio-ecological tipping points in the region requires that new models of development and political decision-making allow for more local agency in shaping human-environment interactions. Global frameworks impact on the local level and often cause collateral damage. Therefore, dialogues on the local scale should be institutionalized to guarantee exchange on the possible impacts beforehand and prevent them.
We see two major open questions we would like to discuss at the end of our session. How to institutionalize a knowledge exchange format between all levels and scales of people who have valuable knowledge to contribute regarding the challenges of biodiversity loss and climate change. How to make co-produced knowledge actionable, for example by developing science-based policy proposals that create mutual benefits among opposing local interest groups. In this interactive session, we would like to hear your ideas on these questions and discuss with you how an effective science policy dialogue can be organized.
Thank you for this part and playing the video. So now I think our starting points should be in place. And now we are listening to our stakeholders with whom we used to discuss our hypothesis and with whom we try to co-produce knowledge on the most important points, like the livelihood security and the resilience of livelihoods, but as well how to contain phosphorus in the soils or to institutionalize knowledge exchange. Obviously, this time there are questions of how they coped with the pandemia crisis in the Amazon and so on. So please listen to our stakeholders, how they perceive the same problematics we address scientifically, and then we can get into a fruitful discussion on the different perspectives. Thank you, and please the video with the stakeholders from the MAP region.
Good afternoon, Don Jorge. Could you tell us your family's livelihood? What does it depend on? Our livelihood depends on producing chestnuts. Chestnuts is a product that we know how to produce, and that is what brings in some resources to our families. Tell us how you produce chestnuts. What is the soil like in the chestnut producing areas? The environment, it has to be a closed rainforest, that trees have not been cut down, and it has a good production because there's different species of wood, of timber. So you actually plant the chestnut? No, 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 not at all. We take care of our hills and mountains because there's many little animals that also help us to these animals are really the ones that plant the seeds. They do their own work. So if we don't take care of all this ecosystem of the nature, then of course the chestnut trees do not grow. How many products do you get from the forest? We have palm, different kinds of palm, but also from wood and timber. We get equil, which is a fruit that is edible, and it also produces oil. It's a very healthy kind of oil. It's a good medication. It cures many illnesses. So you can see that there's many products we get from our hills and mountains. But there's many, many kinds of trees, and it's not only chestnuts we produce. What is the advantage of having this, of having these different species? Well, it's because that mountain or hill will remain healthy. It will keep its own leaves, its own timber, the one that falls naturally on the ground. That becomes like compost for the soil. So all of that is feeding into each other. And for other products, do you have other types of agricultural production? Well, as I say, once trees have been cut down and all that, the important thing is that for the production of corn, of maize, of rice, of beans, of banana, we really do take care of the woodlands and also on the higher levels so that we don't lose our production. How do you keep the soil for an agricultural production? What is the best way? You have to take care of it for about 3, 4 to 5 years, and then after that, we can begin to work it so that we go to the higher part of the woodland, because there's a lot of agricultural production. As I say, the leaves fall on the ground, the timber also, and that rots, but that keeps the soil in a good state. So after producing maize, yucca, bananas, you allow the woodland to regenerate for 3 to 4 years. And then for that, you can go back to agricultural production. Is that how you're ensuring that your soil has good fertilizer? Yes, yes, but there's another case, for example, livestock. How do we raise livestock? Well, first, we let that become fertile, the fallow land. It's like the third stage for the soil. We plant grass, and the reason we have livestock production, we get meat from it, of course, so that is also good as agriculture production. That soil does not get tired easily. Once you have the grass and you've done good work with the soil, then it keeps on going. And isn't livestock raising a danger for losing the forests? You can do it consciously or unconsciously. It depends on who is taking care of the livestock. But we have to reach a balance, a certain amount of livestock with a certain amount of grasslands. Because if you're just going to cut down trees in the woodland, if we're starting off with a temperature of 25 to 28, right now we've reached 35 and even 40 degrees centigrade. You can see the difference. So we are ourselves, the way we live here, what you see is because the lack of a control of some of the large forests. They're extracting wood and timber. So our production of chestnuts in the rainforest. As I say, we also have to take care of the little animals. There are different kinds of monkey or piggies, I believe. All of that is part of the ecosystem. So every single little animal has a role to play. The hochi or cuchilla, that's what we call it here. This is what we have to take care of. It's mandatory. We have the red hochi, which I think is a pig, and then we have a monkey. Sometimes they do eat our fruits too much because the birds and other animals that go up and down sometimes eat the fruits too much, and so yes, the production does fail us. So summing up, what would be your recommendation as a good practice for maintaining the soil in the Amazonian area? Well, it is being aware, being conscious. If we take care of the chestnut tree, after 1 or 2 years it won't produce because it lives for a while, then it rots and it falls down and it dies. So sometimes the chestnut trees, their lives do come to an end. So I think the best recommendation is to take care of what we have and know how to cultivate. Is there a market for other forest products? Do you see a bigger market now? Yes, because our apartment was very small in Pando, where we are now. For example, around 68, there was no land transportation. You never saw cars. But now, of course, that has changed. The department of Pando has grown tremendously. So now whatever we plant, whatever we produce for food, we can sell it. So what other products could you have besides rice and maize for the market? Well, if you want to leave one production and go to another, you can have coffee, you can have cacao. And in maize and corn, there is a natural one and another one that is a little different. What are the threats that you have heard or seen in your natural environment? In the natural environment where we are, changes in climate, and also because of the mining industry, that has hurt us, and also the illegal cutting of timber, those who are cutting down trees, and the trees that are so precious, and legally you cannot cut them, but they continue to do so. And that's what happens with some agricultural people, that they degrade the region. And then, of course, you have higher heat, higher temperature, you have fires, so much so that the farmer who is working can be covered in ash, can be burnt down. This is something real. It's already happening. It's not in the future. The temperatures are much higher than they were before. We never had temperatures before like we do now. And they continue to get worse. We have to take urgent actions in the whole Amazonian region. Policies must change. And I think many of us here in the rainforest, the farmers, the producers, we've been left behind. We don't really have a presence in the different government administrations. They're beginning to visit us, but not really. They have to do it much more regularly. And then farmers like us, because we do not have the equipment, for example, in soil mechanization, we often don't have the tools. You said certain activities must be undertaken. What are you doing now to protect the natural environment? We continue to go on with our good practices. Preserving the forest, the flora, the fauna, and to protect yourselves against these threats that you've mentioned. What are you doing concretely? Well, as farmers, we don't have a lot of control. Thank you. Thank you for the visit. I am Ivan Villafuerte Valles. I have a private lot here, and together with my family, we are receiving any people who want to visit us and see what it is like. So I think it is very important to reactivate our economy because of the pandemics. We have an eco lodge. So with this eco lodge and the visitors we are having, it's helping us to move forth a bit. Now regarding the soil, you can see this area is still good. It is for high consumption. We have banana plantation, but to do that also we have to have some research and get better results because of these future climate changes that are coming in the future. We need to learn how science can help us, and we're here to support anyone who comes and wants to gain knowledge. What about the soils in the region? Do you know? Have you seen changes in the land usage? Well, in this department of Madre de Dios, there is livestock raising. So yes, land usage has changed. There's grasslands. And of course, that whole land has to be recovered. There's not that much livestock raising in Madre de Dios, but there are some areas that have been affected. And then there's also illegal mining. That has produced a tremendous change within the rainforest, and that degraded soil has to be recovered. Any cultivations? Yes, for some of these cultivations, they use chemical products, and that disturbs the whole natural soil ecosystem. So I don't know what that is going to bring in time. I think more studies are needed to find out what will happen with those soils where they are changing the primary activities into something secondary. We have to protect the primary forests. Yes. And we have to focus on the population to address them, because sometimes they just bring down a whole part of the forest. During the pandemic, for example, I was here with my family, but I started fishing. That's what many people had to do because I had no more tourists, and we began to go into other activities. So this is how we have survived during the pandemic, doing artisanal fishing in order to bring in some income for my family's livelihood. So right now we are trying to come back to what we were doing before. We have to continue to protect and do more research, protecting this beautiful forest that we are in. Thank you. Thank you so much. This was about 27 or 30 years ago. It was a horse area of about 30 acres. I have now left the forest to recover. I have let it recover so that we can today recover part of that natural ecosystem. And what we have done is to work with cacao under 3 different systems. One was chakra agriculture, another system which was the natural trees, and another one which is the recovery of grasslands. So yes, this was like a pasture or a cattle ranch. And so we're trying to see what to do to improve the grasslands. Do you think the soil is important for cacao production, to have good quality cacao? I think your question is very important for the entire production, particularly of cacao. Right now, there's a sort of more drastic change taking place in our climate. It's unpredictable. Before we knew better what to expect, for example, in the summer. But now, because of the rains, they last much, much longer. So this means that the production of any kind of plants that you're working with, you're going to face problems. But the biggest and most frustrating problem is the mining. That has caused the greatest impact. Why? Because there are areas where the soil has degraded down 4 or 5 meters. So to actually regenerate all that flora, all that nature, that is going to take decades. It's actually not going to be good for anything, what they've done with it. They've exterminated flora and fauna and insects, all the natural habitat in our areas, and it's going to be very, very hard for that to come back. But we must take action to recover the area faster. Do you think enough is being done for soil protection in the region? I think the legal regulations and standards in Peru, there's a lot of them, and they're good. The problem with authorities at all different levels, state levels, regional levels, municipalities, they're not doing anything. They're not taking action. So, to really do something to mitigate all this, no, we don't see that. We don't see any interest from the authorities. Oh yes, there's some institutions, some universities, some NGOs that are working in this along these lines. But what the state is actually doing and investing to recover the land is hardly anything.
Estoy aquí para explicar algunas cositas de nuestro emprendimiento. Este es un emprendimiento familiar, un emprendimiento que se ha realizado gracias.
This is a family business, and this is thanks to our mother. She had the vision. She understood that this was a very special space. This used to be a cattle ranch and also big-scale farming land. We would produce rice, banana, different types of potatoes. We also had birds. So we have always used nature as a source of income, and we are still supporting this space, our livelihood. We have tried to change many things over time. Farming land represents the farming land has been recovered at the rate of 70%. We have tried to plant new trees in the area. Right now we have 30-year-old trees. We have different types of timber. We have the lucuna. We have a lucuna tree with more than 150 years of age. It is not very common to see this time of trees, but we have one here. So those type of things are a source of pride, because it really shows that we have understood our environment. So here we are at this Eco Lodge, Tombopata River Lodge. I would like to know about your perspective when it comes to soil. What is the meaning of soil for you? The Amazonia soils are not very rich when it comes to farmland. You have seen the soil. These areas have been worked for more than 60, 70 years. In the last 30 years, we have had a lot of help in order to recover the soil, recover the fauna and flora. And this really helps the restructuring of the forest. We have never used pesticides. We have never used fertilizers, chemical fertilizers for plant growing. Everything that we use is very natural. We have been very careful when working with vegetables, with the different turnips, the regional potatoes that we have in the area. We try to use other raw materials. And now the forest is recovering. We have chestnuts, we have cider, we have different types of trees that have helped us in the past. And right now we're trying to bring all those species back, and this has been a 30-year process. And yes, we have seen a recovery of the soils. The space that you see right now is a space that we have opened because of the pandemic. We opened this space because we didn't have another source of livelihood, so we needed to have a piece of land in order to have a livelihood. But as you can see, most of the land is clean. We always try to look after the environment, to keep the balance. So the pandemic has had an impact because of the lack of income. Yes, it has had a big impact because our main source of income was ecotourism. It was okay, but then we had the pandemic and everything went down. That's why we needed to make use of our environment. We needed to work our own land. And we saw that actually the soil had recovered. We have grown rice and corn, very common in the area. The corn is used for animals and rice is for us. This is what we mainly use in the area. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is not always good because sometimes you have to make a decision to live on ecotourism or to do something else with the soil, but I think that you have done great things here. You're participating in Prodigy. This is a project about the sustainability of land and the different tipping points in the different soil processes. So tell me, do you have expectations from these scientific supports? Obviously, they are not a direct support to ecotourism, but they can be another source of support. Well, they support us. They provide more education, more knowledge. We know now more about what's happening with our soils, and this shows in the field work. And this is something that we have been doing over the last 2 or 3 years along with the project, because we have to remember that a project is not a point in time, it is a long period, and this is necessary in order to help people. Well, thank you very much. You said that some soils had been completely degraded, very closer to the tipping point. How do you know this? How do you know that you are reaching the tipping point? in the case of soils. How do you do that? In order to recover our soils, we stopped farming in big pieces of land. In the past, with my parents, I would work 10 or 30 hectares a year, and this is a very big degradation because you have to cut everything down. And we needed to change this. Obviously, we needed production in terms of cattle, yucca, banana, papaya. As you see, well, or as you know, in the Amazonia, we need to promote the growing of different products in order to have different species of plants to live on them. And you can actually see the degradation of the forest. You need to rotate in order to avoid the degradation of the soil. And you need to allow the soil to regenerate. We need to have the secondary plants like the kudzu plant, and the kudzu plant really helps oxygenating the soil. And there are some other species that provide nitrogen and others that change the pH of the soil. This has really helped us in order to support the forest, to avoid rapid degradation. In 5 years, we can go back to the point of origin. So, the kudzu plant. In the case of Brazil, I have seen that they don't have it. What is the case of the kudzu here? It's not a big problem in the area. We have had animals that were fed with kudzu, the kudzu plant. We had a scheme in order to prevent the overpopulation of this plant, because the kudzu can kill orange trees or lemon trees. But in order to avoid these, we started raising different animals that feed on kudzu, and by means of these we reduce the production of kudzu. That's great. You were talking about 30 or 40 hectares a year, and you have to rotate the production. Yeah, that's right. In that way, we have a link with our project, because for us it is very necessary to research how the different components of the soil can be regenerated. I know this is a very technical topic, but this is what you are seeing here. There are some things that we cannot do, but the forest can do it if we allow the forest to regenerate itself. What you are doing with this soil recovery is something very similar. You are trying to introduce some other plants and species that promote the fertilization of the different species that you grow. I think this is great.
It happened the same thing. What happens in live conferences is that we're running out of time. So unfortunately, I won't sum it up to put the different steps of our stakeholders, what they were talking about. And I only very briefly introduce our discussants. From the Prodigy team, we have Oliver Fröhr, Hermann Jungkunst, Jan-Peter Schilling, Rebecca Fröse, and Galia Celaya, who is from our Bolivian partner. And I think to be able to discuss at all, I hand over to Rebecca, who will start with some of the questions of our our audience. I forgot Foster Brown, who is at the Federal University in Acre and the Woodwell Climate Center. So those are the people you can discuss with, and please, Rebecca, hand us in some questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. There were quite some questions coming in during the videos, and I will just go on reading them out in the order that they appeared. I would say the first one is directed to Herman, and the question is, due to the flying river concept, does this mean it would make more sense to combat deforestation in the northeast of the Amazon, so in Brazil? Does it more sense to combat it there than in other regions? And would it have more impact there? Herman.
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. I think we need to particularly protect the northeast of Amazonia, but it should be not forgotten that we need the cascade for the whole region. Therefore, it wouldn't make sense to cut down this forest in the central part, because then the cascade would be, or the flying rivers will dry out and would not feed the agricultural region in the south. But the northeast would be a very important part of the Amazon. And there's Belém close by, therefore probably should take care, because the deforestation is quite large in the northeast already.
Thank you very much. Then there are a couple of questions directed to Oliver, I think. For example, Mercio Cerbaro asks, unemployment is high within the Amazon region. Inflation and several other indirect factors are there that may add further pressure to the soil. How do we link economic and social cohesion with land use and land use change in a transition world recovering from COVID-19?
Well, thank you very much for this question. I think that's a very comprehensive question and quite difficult to answer. We know that there is a lot of economic pressure in that area, and that there is also lots of migration going into these areas, and that will put a lot of pressure on the natural resources. But we need to see that we need to look at the different dimensions, the time dimensions here as well. We know that the Amazon is a fragile ecosystem, and looking only at the short-term outcomes then may create a problem for the longer-term viability. So if we put too much emphasis now on the recovery of economic activities there, it may harm the future livelihoods of people. And it may take away also ecosystem services that are not market-based. This is, I think, an important lesson that we learned, that focusing only on the market-based ecosystems will ignore the social cultural ecosystems that are also important for livelihoods of people. Therefore, it is important for policymakers to adopt policies that refrain from an overpopulation of that area. And what we have seen so far in various countries is that there are great offers, great occurrence of people, moving people into that area, both in Bolivia, in Peru, and in Brazil, and that leads to an overpopulation and therefore too high pressure on those systems. So that part should be better controlled in order to avoid the long-term overexploitation of resources that will harm also the economic and livelihood situation of people.
Thank you. There is a comment also, I think, that fits here quite well from Diana Vasquez. She says, we also have the particular challenge of illegal mining and illicit crops in the Amazon. And as long as those activities keep expanding and providing the huge economic profit, we need to propose feasible and profitable sustainable activities for the locals there. I think that fits quite well to this question. There's another one, another question from Vanessa Boanda Fuchs, also related to Mercio's question that you just answered. And I think that's also related to Oliver. Connected to his question, concerning the social system, data shows that indigenous lands and traditional sustainable use of land in protected areas help to halt the deforestation frontier. However, communities increasingly face the challenge of preventing the youth from leaving those territories in search of access to public services and economic opportunities in cities. How can social cohesion and economic opportunities be fostered locally to provide opportunities for the local people and especially the youth to remain occupying and protecting those lands from illegal invasion and deforestation?
So should I try to answer that question from maybe the economic part? We know that this is really...
You can hand it over to Foster afterwards.
Yes, yeah, I can do that. Thanks, Regine. I think this is a very important question, not to look only at the current situation of land users, but also of the development, how young people will continue using the land. And I think what is important is to bring some commons, some of those services in the vicinities of people, and to keep the connection between the young people who go to other areas to study, to get a school education, and their homelands. So we see that in Peru, that works quite well in some areas that we have visited, also in Bolivia. And I think this is really key to keep this link between urban and rural areas, especially for the young people. So if Foster wants to continue, I would be very happy.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you for this opportunity to be together. In reality, it's not separate. There's a rural area, urban. They're together. And so you need to deal with a joint environment, a joint population. And obviously the influence on the urban lifestyle has repercussions for the rest of the state and country. And I speak more directly to the situation in Acre. So one of the things that we need to do is to show the interdependence for people in the urban environment on how ecosystems and how land use affects, for example, water supply in Rio Branco, and to show and figure out how people can work together to maintain the ecological services, and including that of the property of the soils. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just hand over to Claudia with a question she got in her chat, in the Spanish chat.
Yeah, I have here two questions, one from Juan Francisco and the other one from Diana Maria, related more to governance. And Juan Francisco asks, don't you think that without local alliances, there can be no effective and efficient regional and global alliances? Diana asks how to work hand in hand with the public sector, since the government has the final say in these territories. So maybe Regine or Galia can tell us something about it.
So I just start referring back to our stakeholders. So there were different statements regarding governance and civil society interaction. For example, Don Sander from Bolivia Manoripi mentioned that there are no law enforcement in place and no governance to face all the challenges. And Benigno in Madre de Dios said that there were good legal norms, but no law enforcement, and the only actors who are active in helping them, for example, in recuperation of the soils, are university and civil society actors. And this is more or less what we were observing in the region as well, that civil society has a vital function as well, pushing the public sector, and kind of managing the dialogue of knowledge transfer in the region. So I would like to pass this on to Galia to give some observations from her point of view.
Thanks, Regina. I think the situation brings us to the questions, how to institutionalize knowledge and how to co-produce knowledge in terms of how we encourage local people, grassroots, to react and make pressure over governments to enforce law and to protect forests and livelihoods in the Amazon. And I think we have these questions of how to get grassroots, and it's an old challenge for scientists. But I think today we have an opportunity to use internet, which is also making a revolution in communication. And what I want to say is that we really need to get grassroots without intermediaries, because intermediaries are usually, could be any person, an individual, or even a policymaker, or a leader in communities that have their own interest and political interest, economic interest, that can hinder the opportunities for local people to know what is going on, and also to talk about what they are experiencing. That's why it was important in this session to show what stakeholders and grassroots have to tell about their situation. And therefore, this is time for scientists to think more about communication networks to get direct dialogue with grassroots. And I think we have to encourage governments to improve internet in rural areas, indigenous communities, etc., to get the message across and to let people to reflect on their situation and then to make a mass of grid that can pressure local governments.
Yeah. Okay. So we are already in a solution and recommendation part. Before this, I would like to go back to really serious conflicts we've heard by our stakeholders, for example, mining conflicts, and that they feel left alone to tackle those conflicts, which have very serious impacts on nature and on social cohesion. So perhaps Jan-Peter Schilling could tell us something to how to manage such environmental conflicts from his experience.
Yeah, thanks, Regina. I think it is important to understand the different motivations of the different actors. So if people are going to the mines and do mining, they know that it's detrimental to the environment, and they know it's pretty bad for their surrounding and possibly also future generations. But we have to understand that this is an alternative that they choose because it seems better than the other alternatives that they have. So trying to find a solution or trying to work on these conflicts means taking the different perspectives of the different actors into account, and also understanding why people choose to go into mining. And I think we heard it in the video. What is needed is to work out and to develop alternatives to the mining activity, which is key to solving this conflict and also the environmental impact. Just a quick comment on that. Thank you, Rina.
Okay, thank you very much. I see our timer running, so I would like to come back to some solutions and what our stakeholders told us. So the chief of the Tambopata Eco Lodge, he gave us something interesting to think about regarding scales, in this case, time scales. So he was talking about a 60 years horizon of reforestation and recuperation of soils and the impact he's observing. So the Eco-Lodge on the one hand as one alternative which is not harmful to nature, and the time horizon he gave us, what you need to really find back to good soils and a healthy forest, indicates that it is a problem which has to be handled with a long-term horizon, and that we have to listen a lot more to our stakeholders. So I think what Galia said in the end is key for us, how to support communicative networks in the region as researchers and kind of vehicles of knowledge production, what we can transport from one region to another. And I hope that this session shedded some light in the different levels we are working and the stakeholder interactions, which are vital for us to understand the fine details and to level them and to get always back into discussion after understanding the next step. As well, the interdisciplinarity to work, to understand it from the different perspectives and disciplines. Is there anybody who wants to say some last words from our session? Perhaps I hand back to Hermann.
Thank you, Regine, for the last famous words I can give now. I hope it's a bit odd, this session, because I don't know how many people are really watching and who is really interested in it. I hope there are a lot of people interested in, because the Amazon is important at every scale, from the global to the local scale. So I think it's important that we stay in touch and keep talking. And not only talking, we need some action, of course, and hopefully we can persuade governance to do its best. Thank you very much for being here, listening to us, and hopefully you can get in touch with us so we can work together saving the Amazon. Thank you.
For listening to us. Please get in contact with us if you're interested in any further information, in contacts and documents and the basis we were talking, the concepts we were talking about. Thank you for your interest and have a good GLF conference with all the good sessions to come. We will especially recommend the session of Foster Brown on the whole history of the MAP region. Thank you very much.